When the nurse placed my newborn daughter in my arms, I promised her one thing. She'd never have to know what betrayal feels like. But 2 years later, I found a familiar name buried in a hospital report. Mark Hendress. My ex-husband, the man who swore he'd never be a father, the man the court proved was sterile. Only now he had a baby boy with someone else. Either science had performed a miracle, or someone was lying again. For 2 years, I'd rebuilt my life from the ashes Mark left behind. The court had exposed his lies, his forged documents, his cruel humiliation. I'd kept the apartment, kept my dignity, and brought my daughter Lily into a world free of deceit. My days were filled with soft lullabies instead of shouting matches, and the nights, though lonely, were peaceful. Then one cold February morning, peace shattered. I was at my OB/GYN's office for a routine checkup when a nurse accidentally handed me the wrong patient file. I noticed the name immediately. Hendress Mark. My pulse spiked. I shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity clawed at me. One glance and my breath caught. The file mentioned a newborn son delivered 3 weeks prior, born to Claire Donovan. Claire. His secretary. The woman who'd watched me fall apart from the gallery. For a moment, my vision blurred. I remembered the judge's words. You've been medically sterile since your early 20s. It wasn't a rumor. It was proven fact, backed by DNA results. Mark couldn't have children. Not then, not ever. So how did Claire have his baby? I closed the file and returned it quietly, but my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Either someone had faked records again, or Mark had faked an entire child. And knowing him, nothing was impossible. That night, as Lily slept in her crib, I sat at my desk with my laptop open, searching public birth records. There it was. Noah Hendress, born January 6th, same last name. Same father listed, and beneath it, something I never expected to see. Birth certificate signed by Emily Hendress. My name, my signature. I stared at the scanned birth certificate on my screen, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. Signed by Emily Hendress. I hadn't seen Mark in 2 years, hadn't spoken to him since the divorce decree. How could my name possibly be there? It wasn't just fraud, it was identity theft. And worse, it was a message. Someone wanted me to see this. The next morning, I called Janet Rodriguez, my old attorney, the woman who'd stood beside me when Mark's lies came crashing down in court. She answered on the second ring. Emily? Her tone shifted the second she heard my voice. What's wrong? I told her everything, the hospital file, the baby, the forged signature. There was a pause on the line. Then she said quietly, You realize what this means, right? If that certificate's been filed officially, it's a state document. Whoever used your name just committed a felony. I know, I whispered. And if it's Mark, then he's more desperate than we thought. We met that afternoon at her downtown office. She looked the same as ever, sharp suit, steady eyes. But when I handed her the printout, she frowned. This isn't just a fake signature, she said. It's a copy of your real one. He must have lifted it from the court filings. My stomach twisted. I remembered how Mark had smiled at me that last day in court. The faint curve of his mouth that said, You may have won this round. But I'm not done. Janet leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. Emily, I can file an injunction with the state registrar. But if you're comfortable, we could also request a full investigation. Start with the hospital where the birth happened. Do it, I said. Every part of it. By evening, I was at Northwestern Memorial, holding Lily on my hip as I asked to speak with the birth records department. The clerk, a tired woman in scrubs, raised an eyebrow. And you're? The person whose name appears on a document I never signed. She disappeared into the back office, leaving me standing there with my daughter tugging at my necklace. When the clerk returned, she wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit followed her, hospital legal counsel, judging by the badge clipped to his lapel. Emma Hendress, he said carefully. We're aware of the certificate you're referring to. It's been under review, I repeated. You mean someone forged my signature and you're reviewing it? He didn't flinch. The situation is more complicated than that. The mother, Miss Donovan, claimed there was an administrative mix-up. that she filled out her paperwork using her husband's information and accidentally listed your name instead of hers. It happens. It doesn't happen, I snapped. No one accidentally writes another woman's name on her child's birth certificate. Lily started to fuss, sensing my anger. I rocked her gently, but my voice stayed cold. I want copies of everything related to that file. Every form, every signature, every timestamp. The lawyer hesitated. That's a privacy issue. Not when it's my name on the document. He finally nodded. I'll see what I can do. Outside, Chicago's wind sliced through my coat, but I barely felt it. My head was spinning with questions. Was Claire trying to use my name to legitimize her child? Or was Mark behind this, manipulating her again? That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through Claire's social media. Her accounts were public, pictures of baby Noah in a blue blanket, posts about motherhood and new beginnings. But one photo stopped me cold. A hospital selfie, taken the day of the birth. Behind her bed, taped to the wall, was a patient ID wristband, and printed clearly on it, in bold black letters, were the words, Hendris, Emily. My phone slipped from my hand. That wasn't an accident. That was deliberate. Someone had registered Claire's delivery under my name. For 2 hours, I stared at that photo. Then I picked up my phone and called Janet again. We're not just dealing with forgery, I said, my voice trembling with fury. This is identity fraud, medical impersonation, maybe even insurance fraud. And if Mark's behind this, then we'll take him back to court, Janet finished. Only this time, Emily, he won't just lose his reputation. He could lose his freedom. I looked down the hallway toward Lily's room, her nightlight glowing soft gold against the dark. I remembered the promise I'd made the day she was born. You'll never know betrayal the way I did. But as I sat there, listening to the city hum outside my window, one truth settled deep in my chest. Mark hadn't just betrayed me again. He'd declared war, and I wasn't the same woman he once destroyed. This time, he was going to regret ever underestimating me. The next morning, I dropped Lily off at my sister's house and drove straight to the courthouse. I'd been here before, nervous, broken, desperate to survive. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't the victim walking into Mark's ambush. I was the storm he never saw coming. Janet met me on the courthouse steps with a folder tucked under her arm. We've got movement, she said. The hospital legal team sent over preliminary copies of Claire's admission forms. They're messy. How messy? Janet opened the folder. The paperwork looked familiar. Hospital logo, timestamps, printed patient details. Only one thing stood out. Under patient name, it read Hendris, Emily. Below that, my date of birth. My insurance provider. Even my policy number, my stomach dropped. That's my health insurance. Exactly, Janet said. Someone used your identity to cover Claire's entire hospital stay. Prenatal care, delivery, everything. We're talking tens of thousands of dollars billed under your plan. I felt a rush of nausea. So she pretended to be me? Looks that way. The records show a correction form filed 2 days after the birth, changing the mother's name to Donovan Claire. Guess who signed it? Mark? Janet nodded grimly. The signature matches his exactly. I sat back, my mind spinning. This wasn't random. This was deliberate, coordinated, Mark's specialty. Manipulate, control, humiliate. He'd used my name again, only this time, not to destroy my reputation, but to erase it, replace me with Claire. Can we prove it? I asked. Oh, we can do more than prove it, Janet said. We can bury him with it. By noon, she'd filed an emergency motion requesting a court order for a full records release, hospital documents, insurance claims, and any communication involving my personal data. Within 48 hours, we had enough evidence to make even Mark's expensive lawyer sweat. The email trail was damning. 2 weeks before Claire's delivery, Mark had contacted the hospital's billing department, identifying himself as my spouse and updating our insurance information. He'd even provided a copy of our old marriage certificate. A week later, the hospital verified coverage, and the fraud was complete. Janet's lips tightened as she read the last email aloud. Please ensure my wife receives the best possible care under her existing plan. Monsieur Hendris. He signed it himself, she said. No aliases, no middleman. Just pure arrogance. That's Mark, I said quietly. He always thought he could outsmart everyone. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. Then I asked the question that had been gnawing at me since the beginning. Janet, what if the baby isn't even Claire's? She blinked. What are you talking about? I pointed to the admission timestamp. Look at the date, January 6th. But Claire posted a baby bump photo on social media just 5 days earlier. She didn't even look close to giving birth. And the baby in that first hospital picture? He's at least 2 or 3 months old. I know because Lily looked exactly that age in her photos. Janet frowned, scrolling through the images on my phone. You think they faked the birth? Maybe not completely, I said. But something doesn't add up. What if the baby isn't Claire's biologically? What if Mark bought him? The words hung heavy in the air. It sounded insane. But after everything Mark had already done, faking medical records, committing perjury, forging documents, insanity didn't feel out of reach. Janet exhaled slowly. Emily, if what you're suggesting is true, this goes beyond civil court. We're talking about child trafficking, fraud, federal crimes. I know, I said. That's why we have to find out. Over the next week, Janet and I dug deeper. We subpoenaed hospital security footage from the day of Claire's supposed delivery. At first, the hospital resisted, until Janet reminded them of the penalties for obstruction in an ongoing fraud investigation. When the footage arrived, I watched it with trembling hands. The timestamp read January 6, 9:47 a.m. The hallway was quiet. Then I saw her, Claire, walking in, visibly nervous, but not pregnant. She was wearing a loose coat, carrying a small bag. She went into the maternity wing, stayed exactly 42 minutes, and walked out with Mark, holding a swaddled baby. My heart stopped. She hadn't gone into labor. She hadn't been in that hospital long enough to give birth. I turned to Janet, my voice shaking. He staged the whole thing. Janet's jaw set. Then we take this to the DA. The next morning, we met with a state prosecutor who specialized in fraud and identity theft. His name was Thomas Bell, a tall man with a calm but cutting manner. He listened carefully as we laid everything out. The fake medical records, the insurance fraud, the video footage, and the possibility of a purchased infant. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, You've just handed me the outline of a criminal case, Ms. Hendris. If we can confirm that child's birth records were falsified, your ex-husband could be facing prison time. I felt my pulse quicken. What happens now? We start with DNA testing, Bell said. The child's, Mark's, and Claire's. If that baby isn't biologically related to either of them, we'll know this runs deeper than just insurance fraud. He looked directly at me. Are you prepared for what happens if we prove it? I nodded. More than ever. When I left his office, snow was falling in soft flakes, covering the courthouse steps like a blank slate. For the first time in years, I felt something new stirring inside me. Not anger, not pain, but purpose. Mark thought he could use my name, my life, my history as his weapon. He thought I'd stay quiet, afraid to reopen old wounds. He was wrong, because this time I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every woman who'd ever been erased by a man who thought power meant ownership. And when this was over, I wasn't just going to take back my name. I was going to make sure his never appeared on another birth certificate again. 2 weeks later, the city was wrapped in gray clouds when the prosecutor's office called. I was feeding Lily breakfast when Janet's number flashed on my phone. Emily, she said without preamble. The DNA results came back. I froze. And, her voice dropped, steady but cold, the child isn't related to Claire, or to Mark. The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the counter. Lily blinked up at me, oatmeal on her chin. Then whose baby is it? That's what we're about to find out. By noon, I was sitting across from Thomas Bell again, hands clasped tightly in my lap. The file sat on his desk, open to a page with 3 columns of numbers, DNA markers, comparison charts, Cold science translating into human betrayal. Bell pointed to the results. No biological connection to either adult listed on the birth certificate, which means the baby was registered under false parentage. My mind reeled. So Claire pretended to give birth to a child that isn't hers. But why? For Mark? For money? Belle exchanged a glance with Janet. We're still investigating. But the evidence suggests the child may have come through an illegal private adoption. Or worse, a black market arrangement. We've traced a payment of $75,000 from Mark's old business account to a birthing solutions agency in Wisconsin. It's not a licensed adoption firm. I pressed my hand to my mouth. He bought a baby. Belle nodded grimly. We believe so. And he used your insurance and identity to disguise the transaction. That's how he laundered the medical expenses. By pretending the birth was yours. My stomach churned. It was monstrous. But it was also classic Mark. Control, power, image. He'd lost his reputation in court 2 years ago. Now he wanted it back by proving he could have a perfect family, even if he had to build it on stolen pieces of someone else's life. Belle leaned forward. Emily, we're bringing criminal charges against both Mark and Claire. Identity theft, insurance fraud, falsification of legal documents, and potential child trafficking. But before we proceed, there's something else. He flipped a page and slid a photo toward me. It was blurry, taken from surveillance at the Wisconsin border. Mark, wearing a dark coat, handing a man a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. My breath caught. That was the exchange, Belle said. 2 days before Claire's delivery. I couldn't look away. My ex-husband, the man who once promised me the world, had become something unrecognizable. When do we confront him? I asked. Soon, Belle said. But we want you to testify when the charges are filed. Your statement will tie his past pattern of deceit to this case. I swallowed hard, glancing down at Lily's photo tucked in my wallet. I'll do it. 3 days later, we were back in the same courthouse where Mark's lies had once collapsed. Only this time the courtroom wasn't filled with whispers about my supposed infertility. It was packed with reporters, photographers, and spectators waiting to see a former financial executive charged with kidnapping and fraud. When Mark entered, flanked by 2 lawyers, my chest tightened. He looked thinner, harder. The smug arrogance was gone, replaced by a twitch in his jaw. Claire wasn't beside him. I'd heard she'd been arrested at her apartment the night before. Judge Walsh, yes, the same one, presided again. Fate has a sense of humor. She looked older, sterner, but when her eyes landed on me, there was recognition. Ms. Hendress, she said quietly, I hope this time you're here for justice, not defense. I am, Your Honor. Mark's lawyer stood, smooth and unbothered. Your Honor, my client maintains he was misled by an unlicensed adoption agency. He believed the child was legitimately placed for adoption and had no knowledge that fraudulent paperwork was used. I felt my hands curl into fists. Classic Mark, turning manipulation into victimhood. Bell rose from his seat. Your Honor, the evidence paints a very different picture. Mr. Hendress orchestrated every part of this deception, using his ex-wife's identity to fund and conceal an illegal acquisition of a child. He forged signatures, falsified hospital admissions, and committed insurance fraud to construct a lie. Judge Walsh nodded. We'll proceed with preliminary testimony. Ms. Hendress, please take the stand. As I walked forward, my heart pounded like thunder. Mark's eyes followed me, flat and dark. He didn't look angry. He looked afraid. I raised my right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. Bell approached with the calm precision of a surgeon. Ms. Hendress, can you describe when you first became aware of this false birth record? I told the story, finding the hospital file, the forged signature, the insurance notices. I spoke clearly, carefully, never once looking away from Mark. I wanted him to see what he'd created, a woman who wasn't his victim anymore. When Bell asked about motive, I didn't hesitate. Mark lost everything after the divorce, his job, his reputation, his control. This wasn't about wanting a child. It was about proving he could still win, still make me look small. But he forgot one thing. Truth doesn't bend forever. Eventually, it snaps back. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. Then Mark's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Ms. Hendress, isn't it true that you despise your ex-husband? Yes, I said calmly. For good reason. Isn't it also true that you would do anything to see him punished? I met his gaze. I don't want him punished. I want him accountable. Mark shifted in his seat, his composure cracking. This is insane, he muttered. She's making it sound like Judge Walsh slammed her gavel. Mr. Hendress, you'll remain silent until addressed. The hearing stretched for hours. Evidence was presented. The emails, the payment records, the DNA results, and the hospital footage. Every lie Mark had told unraveled in real time. When Belle displayed the photo of Mark at the Wisconsin border, the room gasped. Judge Walsh's face went rigid. Mr. Hendress, she said finally, do you wish to respond before I issue my ruling? Mark stood, his voice trembling for the first time. Your Honor, I was desperate. I just wanted a family. I wanted to fix everything she took from me. I couldn't stay silent. What I took from you? I said, rising to my feet. You forged my name. You humiliated me. You tried to destroy me. And now you stole someone else's child to feel whole? That's not desperation, Mark. That's evil. Judge Walsh lifted her gavel. Enough, I've heard all I need. Her tone cut through the tension like a blade. This court finds probable cause for charges of identity theft, insurance fraud, and conspiracy to commit child trafficking. Mr. Hendress, you are remanded into custody pending formal indictment. Mark turned toward me then, really looked at me. For years I'd imagined that look, the moment he realized he'd finally lost everything. But instead of satisfaction, what I felt was peace. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. 2 officers took him by the arms and led him away. The doors closed behind him with a heavy finality that echoed through the courtroom. Janet placed a hand on my shoulder. It's over. I looked down at my hands, trembling but free. No, I said softly. It's finally beginning. Outside, flashes from cameras lit up the gray afternoon as I stepped down the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For once, my silence said everything. That night, I held Lily close as the news played in the background. Chicago businessman arrested in child fraud scandal. She looked up at me, wide-eyed, innocent. I kissed her forehead and whispered, Justice always finds its way, sweetheart. Sometimes it just takes time, and for the first time in 7 years, I actually believed it. A month after the verdict, the courthouse hallways had gone quiet. The headlines had faded, the cameras turned elsewhere, and the world moved on. But I hadn't. Justice wasn't a single event. It was something you had to live with, day by day, even when the noise disappeared. Mark remained in custody, awaiting sentencing. Claire had taken a plea deal, testifying about how he'd manipulated her too, how he'd promised her love, a future, and then used her to carry out his fraud. I didn't forgive her, but I understood her weakness. We'd both fallen for the same illusion, just at different times. It was Belle who called me one afternoon. There's someone who wants to meet you, he said. The baby's biological mother. My heart clenched. She's found. Yes, she's a 19-year-old girl from Milwaukee. She was told her child was being placed for adoption, but she never saw the paperwork. When our team showed her what happened, she broke down. I agreed to meet her. When I arrived at the social services office, she was sitting in the corner, clutching a small stuffed bear. Her name was Sarah. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking. I introduced myself softly, sitting across from her. You don't have to thank me, I said before she could speak. I didn't do this for anyone but the truth. Tears spilled down her cheeks anyway. But you found him, she whispered. They told me he was gone, that I'd never see him again. You made sure I did, I smiled faintly. Then maybe something good came out of all this. A social worker entered, holding a sleeping baby. Small, peaceful, unaware of the storm he'd been born into. Sarah reached for him with trembling arms, and as she held him close, the air in the room shifted. The chaos, the lies, the years of pain, all of it seemed to dissolve in that quiet, perfect moment. Belle caught my eye from the doorway and nodded once. We didn't need words. It was over. Later that night, I walked Lily through the park near our apartment. The city lights shimmered in the distance, reflected in the pond like tiny stars trapped in water. She laughed when I lifted her into the air, her giggles carrying across the cold air. I thought of everything that had happened. The courtroom, the betrayal, the lies that had nearly broken me. But somewhere in that wreckage, I'd found strength I never knew I had. I'd learned that revenge doesn't always come from rage. Sometimes it comes from resilience, from standing tall when the world tries to crush you. Lily pointed to the sky. Mommy, look, moon. I followed her gaze and smiled. Yeah, baby. It's shining again. She rested her head on my shoulder. And for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because Mark was gone, but because I finally was. As we walked home, I passed a newsstand with the final headline about the case. Truth restored. The woman who exposed a web of lies. I didn't buy the paper. I didn't need the reminder. The only truth that mattered was right there in my arms, breathing, laughing, alive. And as the wind swept through the quiet streets, I whispered to the night, not in anger, but in peace. Goodbye. Mark, you can't hurt us anymore. Then I turned the corner and never looked back.